Here's Spirit School, Chapter 8, entitled Cottage. Lucy passed him a bottle of water, which he guzzled down quickly. The escapade had put the girls off going in the water, so they decided to wander deeper into the woods. "This time let's not get lost," said Anna. They marched on as the sunlight shone through the trees and the birds were whistling everywhere. After 10 minutes of crunching over the leaves, they came across an old cottage. It was bedraggled looking, with weeds growing out of the chimney, and the wooden slats over the windows were hanging loose above the round red front door. They approached with trepidation. They had to step over the weeds on the pathway, which looked as if they had been designed to obstruct any curious visitors. The rusty gate creaked loudly, sending crows flapping into the air as they mimicked the sound. They gingerly stepped inside, brushing cobwebs from their faces that hung like a veil. The room was dimly lit with broken tiles on the floor and pictures hanging at an angle. There was a small kitchen and wash basin full of broken, dirty crockery. It looked like it hadn't seen washing up liquid or a good mop for an age. A few creaky-looking rocking chairs faced each other at each end of the living room. There was a bookshelf stuffed with dusty books, and a wooden table stood looking lonely and unpolished in the centre of the room. "Wow," said James, "this is so spooky." "Yeah," said Tom, "ain't it great?" he added. James was now acquainted with his Americanisms, and he wasn't annoyed. In fact, he was amused. The girls tiptoed gingerly into the room, watching where they stepped as the floor was thick with grease. "This is amazing," said Lucy, "like a fairy tale." "More like a nightmare," said Anna. "It's just like the Brothers Grimm," she added. Lucy ran her finger across the books, scattering cobwebs and dust everywhere. She looked at the titles, and they were all concerning medicine and history and geography, all subjects that she knew nothing about. Anne grabbed a book and flicked through it, sending a puff of smoke into the air, dust into the air and into Lucy's nostrils. Lucy sneezed heavily. The sound reverberated round the room and startled more crows who filled the sky outside the cottage's broken window. Tom and James sat at the table and looked down at the rusty cutlery and two glasses which were not to be filled. In the middle of the table was a large, heavy-looking brown book. They wiped the cobwebs off and started leafing through it. And to their surprise, when they opened it, they realized it was a photograph album. At first it was full of beautiful photographs of the woods in all seasons and photos of the lovely roses that once grew outside the door. As they turned more pages, it became less optimistic and more dark. In the middle of the book, it showed a couple holding hands and looking like they were so in love. James quickly realized that the woman in the book was the librarian. He called out to the girls, and they rushed over, and he pointed to the photos of the couple. Lucy gasped, and even Anna looked impressed. They crowded round eagerly, awaiting the next surprising turn of the page. There were more photos of the happy couple holding hands and walking through the woods looking content and happy. James leaned closer and he realized where he had seen the man's face before, the school yearbook. The girl recognized him and proceeded to turn the pages with mounting excitement. The further they got into the book, the less happy they appeared. The man seemed to frown more, and the librarian looked more gaunt, with a look of passion or anger blazing in her eyes. It was hard to tell which. Their mood seemed to darken with the seasons, bright and loving in the spring and cold and angry in the winter. When they got near the end of the book, there was a dramatic change, as there were no more photos of the couple, only of her. "Wow," said Lucy, "I wonder where he's gone to." "Maybe they've split up," said Anna. "You don't say," said Tom, with his usual dazzling smile. They turned the page to see a strange photo of a small fire with a hat and scarf laid ceremoniously on top. "Holy smoke," said Anna, "she's burning his stuff." "They must have had a big row," Lucy intoned. "Sure looks like it," said Tom. "Or maybe she's killed him." "Maybe she turned him into a frog," said James helpfully, but no one laughed. They turned the next page apprehensively. All of the photos were scratched out, all except one. It was a mound of earth that had been created looking ominously like a grave. Oh my God, the girls said together. She did kill him and he's buried in the woods. He must have cheated on her, said Tom, as if this was justification. Makes you want to stay celibate, said James. Too right, said Tom. The rest of the photo album was empty. I wonder if anyone else knows about this, said Lucy. They must do, replied Anne. And it was at that moment that the shutters banged together, making everyone jump. Tom marched over to close them bravely. It's just the weather, he said. The girls were relieved until a picture flew off the wall and shattered into pieces. I think it's time to go, said Tom, trying not to sound scared. They all agreed and set off back into the woods. The sky had darkened and the woods took on an ominous, dark quality. Each snap of a twig or hoot of an owl made them jump and walk a little quicker. Lucy and Anna were holding hands, comforting each other as Tom and James marched on confidently before them. I hope we don't go anywhere near that horrid grave, whispered Lucy. Don't mention it, said Anna, who always thought of herself as a bit of a tomboy, but she was losing her resolve. Tom and James made small talk until a piercing scream from behind them made them jump out of their skins in fear. Oh my God, said the girls, hugging each other and crying. It's the librarian. She must have realized we'd been to the cottage. The boys comforted them and hurried the girls along to the clearing. More screams echoed behind them, growing fainter and fainter like the memory of a bad dream. The woods began to thin out and they could see the light shining through. They were all relieved to be back in the school. That's the last time we go there, said Lucy angrily. Amen to that, said Anne. Tom and James laughed it off, but inside they were shaken. They all slept fitfully that night, with the librarian's angry face and blazing eyes cutting into their dreams unwontedly. The next day they decided to do more research on her. There were a few articles on her career, but nothing concerning her doomed affair. So they decided to research her lover and victim. His obituary appeared in the local paper. He was the school gardener and caretaker. He was tall and skinny with a bald patch and glasses, and although slim, his arms were muscular and strong with all the digging. He was 60 when he died, but looked younger. He had been found face down in a flower bed after a heart attack. I knew she'd killed him, said Anna. Probably poisoned, said Lucy. Tom and James were amazed. But how did she become a ghost? Inquired Lucy. I'm sure we'll find out in time, said Anne. Maybe we should see the headmaster and see what he says about it, said James forcibly. They had learned that Mr. Graves the head had an affair with the librarian, and they hoped that he could shed some light on it. He was surprised to see them. He listened to their story and he admitted that their experience in the woods wasn't unique, but he didn't believe that the gardener had been murdered. The gardener's name was Mr. Small, which was quite ironic, as he was over 6 feet tall. He admitted that he had an affair with the librarian and that it was very passionate and heated. Anna spoke up. How did she die? That's a mystery, Mr. Graves said. Tom and James noticed that he was sweating, and he messed with his tie as he answered each question. Well, Mr. Graves intoned, I'm a busy man. I'm sure you've got lots to do as well. They headed for the canteen, and over coffee Tom and James voiced their suspicions, but the girls hadn't suspected anything. He looked shifty to me, said Tom. Yeah, he's definitely covering something up, echoed James. He knows more than he's letting on. Hang on a minute, said Anne. Hasn't he already admitted to having an affair with her? Maybe he got jealous. It wouldn't surprise me, interrupted Lucy. Men are jealous creatures, she said with a knowing smile. The next day they decided to do more research in secret in the library. Lucy and Anna looked through the school magazine and newspapers for any record of the librarian's fate. It was slow and boring work. Tom and James acted like proper students so as to distract suspicion and had their heads buried in their books. After a good hour of searching, Anna found what they were looking for. There was a photo of the librarian with a short obituary. She had worked at the school for 10 years. But how did she die? Said Lucy. Anna read further. Oh, natural causes. She died in her sleep. I doubt that, said Anna, but how can we prove otherwise? Interjected Lucy. Tom and James shook their heads. All we can do is keep an eye on her, said Mr. Graves. There's a lot more to this than meets the eye. James and Anna went for a walk around the woods and they held hands contentedly. They chatted about all the fun they'd had. Lucy and Anna sat on the edge of the bed holding hands. This is a very strange place, she said. Sure is, said Tom. I never expected any of this when I passed over. In fact, I didn't expect anything. The evening came to an end quickly and they all retired to bed. It had been a tiring and eventful day. Tomorrow would be no better as they had a history lesson to not look forward to. The next day they met in the cafe and they were all rather quiet as they were still tired. Tom kept yawning loudly and James nearly nodded off in his breakfast. They sat down in the lesson half asleep. The banging of the door soon woke them and the teacher marched in confidently. He was overweight, clean-shaven, with a long black fringe and chubby red cheeks. He rambled on about kings and queens of England with amazing enthusiasm and knowledge that he couldn't help rouse their reluctant interest. Luckily for them, the class was full and they could mask their tiredness and indifference by occasionally looking up and nodding. The teacher, Mr. Portman, was so wrapped up in his subject that he didn't notice. He really was an excellent teacher, full of fire and passion. Occasionally he would bang the desk with his fist to make a point, and they would all jump to attention. James tried to concentrate, but he felt like his eyelids had lead weights on them. Tom sat there with a fixed smile on his face as he drifted in and out of dreamland. The girls were just as tired, and one minute they seemed to be listening to the lecture, and the next they were dozing off. Finally, the lesson ended, and the scraping of the chairs brought them back to reality. They all met for lunch, and the strong coffee worked its revitalizing effects on them. After lunch, they had a private study to catch up on. Although it was strict here, it was nowhere near as strict as a proper school. On average, they only did 20 hours per week, almost part-time, with a choice of 4 subjects each, i.e. music, history, geography, maths. There was very little homework, which was a great relief to them. They had no internet, no telephones. Maybe this was a security measure to stop long-distance calls to relatives. But do phones work in the afterlife, they thought. They had no idea, and no one was saying. They were in a similar but different world. If only we could tell our parents we were okay, said Lucy. I know, said Anna. It's so frustrating. I wish I could tell them. I'm sure they believe that, Lucy answered, helpfully. Imagine the shock it would cause if people knew the truth. Yes, said Tom sadly, it's like UFOs. If people knew they were real, they'd panic. That's right, said James. And even then, there'd be some people who wouldn't accept it. You can't win with some people. Even if it was live on TV, some people would say it was fake, he added dismissively. Although Tom was outgoing, he was suspicious of most people, which he masked with sarcasm and wit. He was a complex fellow. James liked everyone, but he didn't like anyone to get close, unless it was a woman. He was a believer in true love and a romantic at heart, but he kept that quiet. Tom excused himself and went to find Lucy, who was reading in the library. She was deep into a romantic novel. Come on, said Tom, let's go for a walk. It's boring in here. He could be pushy. Hang on, said Lucy. Let me finish this bit. It's quite exciting. Tom waited, mildly exasperated. Then Lucy grabbed his hand and they set off. It was a lovely autumnal day. The leaves were crisp and glorious, blowing around their feet as if being brushed by an invisible broom. Tom felt a rush of happiness. He never expected to be happier in death than in life, but he was. The sun dappled the trees and fell on them like honey. He happily kicked the leaves from under his feet. Lucy laughed and all was well with their world. They avoided the old cottage and skirted round the edge of the woods. Crows flew into the sky like black kites, cawing as they went. Lucy held his hand tighter as they trudged on. Back in the dormitory, James and Anna lay on their bunk together. James had his head in her lap. He was feeling sleepy, as usual. She stroked his hair and chatted about the weather. It's nice to relax, James said. I'm always on the go. Poor you, said Anna, and continued to stroke him like a pet. He drifted off to sleep, and it was a very clear dream, and a frightening one at that. He was walking barefoot from his dormitory over the crisp wet grass. He seemed to be being guided by an invisible force. He walked into the woods, oblivious to the creepy-looking trees. A voice seemed to whisper to him to keep going. He trudged on until he came to the familiar site of the cottage, but this time it wasn't broken down at all. The front door gleamed bright red as if it had been newly painted, and the windows shone in the sunlight. Roses grew around the outside, splashing their petals on the newly mown lawn. He knocked on the door and it opened slowly. He walked inside like a sleepwalker, taking everything in. In the living room there was a table covered by a chintzy white tablecloth. At the foot of the table sat a woman with her head bowed. Her fingers were drumming on the table to an invisible tune. He said a dreamy hello, and then she turned to face him slowly and she brushed her hair from her eyes to reveal her ashen, dead grey face. Her eyes were burning red as if hot blood would flow from them. She opened her mouth to reveal broken teeth, and her tongue licked her lips menacingly as a spider escaped. She grabbed a cup off the table and it shattered in her tight grasp, blood flowing down her arms, pooling over the table. Then she let out a piercing scream. Get out, damn you, she cried, her face contorted with hatred and rage. The wallpaper began to peel and the pictures sagged. She grew older before his eyes. He ran to get out, but his footsteps were slow as if walking in toffee. He grabbed the door handle and it dissolved in his hand like soap. The paint peeled and bubbled as he heard her evil laughter echoing behind him, a high-pitched cackle.